Imagine being on a plane, minding your own business, when suddenly a police officer approaches and arrests a woman, just like that. But what happens next will shock you. This isn't just any routine arrest. It's a confrontation that starts with tension and ends with one powerful sentence from the woman in question that leaves everyone stunned into silence. This moment on a crowded flight is more than just a dramatic incident. It raises questions about authority, respect, and how we treat each other in high-pressure situations. But the real question is, what exactly did she say that shut the entire room down? Stick around, because her words will not only change the mood, but may make you rethink how we respond to injustice. Stay tuned as we dive into this intense encounter and uncover the shocking twist that no one saw coming. The woman, a black passenger, had been sitting quietly for most of the flight, reading a book, her mind far from any trouble. But that changed the moment a disagreement erupted between her and a flight attendant. The tension between the two had been building ever since the plane took off, but it seemed like a small misunderstanding until it wasn't. The conversation grew louder, and before anyone knew it, a police officer was called on board to handle the situation. Passengers shifted uneasily in their seats, some whispering, others pulling out their phones to record. The officer, a large figure in uniform, stepped forward with authority, ordering the woman to stand up and follow him off the plane. But instead of cowering or escalating things, she paused, looked him square in the eyes, and said something that instantly hushed the entire cabin. The officer froze. The passengers watched, waiting, wondering what would happen next. The cabin was eerily silent as the officer stood there, still unmoving. It was as if time itself had slowed down. The woman's eyes remained locked on him, calm but unwavering. Her hand, previously resting on her book, now sat gently on the armrest, her fingers curling slightly. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what was going on, but they were all drawn in by the tension hanging thick in the air. From the back of the plane, a middle-aged man, one of the witnesses, muttered to his wife, "This isn't right. I've been on flights where people have caused real trouble, and they don't get treated like this." His voice was low, but others around him nodded in agreement. The woman's voice, steady and strong, broke the silence. "Is this what you think of me?" she asked the officer, her words hanging heavy in the air. The officer, caught off guard by her calmness, stammered, but the words didn't come. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, eyes darting to the flight crew, then back to her. Meanwhile, the flight attendant stood at the front of the aisle, her arms crossed, a look of uncertainty clouding her face. It seemed like she hadn't expected this kind of resistance. In the back of the plane, a group of young people were recording on their phones. They'd seen similar situations in the news, people being unfairly singled out, harassed, or even arrested for things that didn't add up. They knew this wasn't going to end like the others. Something was different here. Was it the woman's calm in the face of authority? Or was it the unsettling feeling that the tension was quickly turning into something more serious? As the seconds ticked by, a woman sitting 2 rows behind the officer leaned over to her partner. "Why is she being arrested? What did she do?" The partner, equally confused, shrugged. The confusion in the cabin was palpable. No one knew the full story, and yet, everyone felt the wrongness of the situation. The woman hadn't raised her voice, hadn't made a scene, and still, she was being escorted off the plane like a criminal. The officer's hand hovered over his radio, unsure of what his next move should be. Meanwhile, the woman remained unfazed. Her voice broke through the tension once again. "You don't get to treat me like this," she said, her eyes still fixed on him. The simple yet defiant statement made the air seem even thicker. The officer's grip tightened around his radio, but he still didn't speak. It wasn't just the officer's authority that was being questioned, it was the system itself. In a world where certain groups often find themselves targeted, unfairly treated, or criminalized without cause, the passengers felt something stir within them. This wasn't just about one woman on a plane anymore, it was about something much bigger. And then, just as the atmosphere reached its breaking point, the woman said those words, the ones that would silence everyone in the room. The ones that would echo far beyond that small airplane cabin. The officer stood there, paralyzed, his hands still hovering over his radio, but not pressing the button. The woman's eyes never left him. Her voice, steady and filled with an intensity that no one expected, cut through the stillness like a blade. "You can't arrest me for standing my ground," she said, her words clear, each syllable purposeful. The passengers, once tense with confusion, now shifted uneasily. It was clear that this wasn't just a case of a minor disagreement. This was about something much deeper, something that resonated within everyone in the cabin. The flight attendant, who had called for the police in the first place, glanced nervously at the officer. Her face had lost its earlier smugness, replaced with uncertainty. She, too, was now realizing the magnitude of what was unfolding. The other passengers were beginning to speak in hushed tones, sharing their thoughts on what was happening. "Why is she being treated like this?" One whispered. "This doesn't seem right," another added. The officer glanced back and forth, his body language now betraying his internal conflict. He'd come on this plane expecting a quick resolution, a simple arrest. But nothing about this situation was simple. The woman's calm defiance had thrown him off. She wasn't reacting the way he'd expected, and it made him question his own actions. From the back of the plane, someone else spoke up, an older man. The woman's eyes didn't waver from the detective. "You were supposed to keep it quiet," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The detective's face hardened, and for a moment, it seemed like the entire plane was holding its breath. This revelation only deepened the mystery. What was this investigation? What did the woman know? And why was she suddenly at the center of such a dramatic scene on a plane? The passengers, already on edge, now found themselves tangled in a web of secrets, suspicions, and unanswered questions. The stakes had just been raised to an entirely new level, and with the detective's presence, the conflict wasn't just about what happened on this plane. It was about something far more dangerous and significant. The officer, still reeling from the news, glanced at the detective one last time before he turned to the woman. The tension in the cabin reached a boiling point as everyone waited for the next move. Would the detective help her, or was there more to this story than anyone realized? The silence was deafening as the detective stood facing the woman, his expression cold but calculating. He glanced at the officer, then back at the passengers who were all watching this dramatic turn of events unfold. The officer, still processing everything, took a step back. His authority was crumbling before his eyes, and it was clear that the power dynamics in the cabin had shifted. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," the detective muttered, almost to himself. His words hung heavy, as if a part of the puzzle had just been revealed, but it wasn't clear which piece fit where. The woman, however, didn't flinch. She met his eyes, her gaze unwavering. The detective turned to the officer, his tone sharp. "You've been chasing The mystery wasn't over, not by a long shot. The plane descended in a sharp turn, the engines roaring louder as the passengers exchanged nervous glances. The woman had disappeared, leaving behind nothing but questions and a growing sense of unease. The detective and officer remained silent, their previous roles of authority now called into question by the gravity of what had just unfolded. What they didn't know was that the woman had done exactly what she needed to, put herself out of reach. By the time the plane touched down, she was long gone, lost in the crowd, her part in the investigation only partially revealed. In the days that followed, news outlets began covering the story, though no one knew the full extent of the conspiracy that had been hinted at. The woman's disappearance was the last piece of a puzzle no one could quite put together. But for the passengers who witnessed it all, that moment would stay with them forever, a stark reminder of the power of one person standing their ground. The truth wasn't always clear, and sometimes the most powerful moments didn't come with resolutions, they came with questions. And those questions would linger long after the plane had landed.